And it's an hour, right?
Half hour to an hour, however
Okay,
long we have
good.
questions.
It says now we're streaming on YouTube live.
Well, hello, YouTube. It still says it's setting up on my back end. So if you see us and we don't see you yet, hello and welcome. This is Laura and the most exciting Dr. Jonny. All right, we are definitely live. So welcome everyone. Yes, again, this is Laura. I'm the social media manager and Metabolic Mastery Club manager at Metabolic Living. And we are here today with the one and only Dr. Jonny Bowden, who created our amazing Metabolic Factor program and is also one of the biggest people involved in our Metabolic Mastery Club as well. You all asked us, who is Dr. Jonny? Tell me more about Dr. Jonny.
You're going to be sorry you asked.
So we have him here for the next little while. We also can, just a little housekeeping, if you're joining us on YouTube, I can take questions. So if you leave them there at the very end, I'll go and check and see what you have to say there. And I also have some of your questions that came over YouTube and on Facebook. So without further ado, we can get started. And I guess the biggest question, we can't just say like, who is Dr. Jonny? I mean, he's right here. Well, I guess, why don't you tell us, how did you get to be Dr. Jonny? Is that a better way of phrasing this initial question?
Absolutely, that's fine. Either way is fine. And your embarrassingly flattering intro is very, very kind. I sometimes wonder myself how I got this lucky to have the greatest job in the world, to be healthy, to be 74, and to have people actually asking, who is this guy who gives us this advice? How did, it's a sort of out of body moment if you think about it. I came from drug addiction. I was a musician. I was everything you think of in your mind when you think about drug addiction and musicians. I was a jazz musician. I grew up in New York. I was fat. I battled weight. I always say I was probably at some point addicted to every drug that's listed in the PDR. That's the physician's desk reference, and lists every drug ever made. Of course, that's an exaggeration, but you get the idea. And health was the furthest thing from my mind. And I was working primarily as a conductor for Broadway shows and road companies. And I did get sober before I did all this. And I did stop using drugs. And that was around 1980, 81. And I started working in musical theater and I started conducting. Along the way, I got a master's degree in psychology and was planning on becoming a clinical psychologist. I went all but dissertation, ABD it's called. And then I decided that music was my real love. I am grateful that I got that master's in psychology because it was probably the most helpful thing in my weight loss coaching career that I ever did. So around 1980, I began working consistently as a musician and musical director. And we would travel to these cities and we would do what they call sit-down companies. We'd resident there for a week or 10 days and do shows every night. We'd have the days free and it was boring. And the actors were all in shape. They'd all work out and there was nothing to do. So I said, hey, show me how to do some of these exercises. This is me. I'm fat. I'm smoking. I'm, an ex-addict, but still very out of shape person. And I got bitten by the bug. I mean, you want to talk about a conversion. I found this new way of lifting weights and going to the gym and beginning to eat what I then thought was healthy in the 80s, which you can imagine the most low-fat diet in the man. But I got bitten by the bug. And I was not one of those people who instantaneously transformed their health. I was the guy that we make fun of now that actually would do a set of bench presses at the gym and then go out and have a cigarette on the break. I mean, it took me a while to kind of transform this, but once I did, I became a zealot. I lost weight. I look back at pictures of me in those days and I look 20 years older than I do now. And that was back in 1980. So it was quite a revelation for me. And being a upper middle class, academically trained New York liberal Jew, the first thing I thought of is like, I have to get legitimate at this. I got to get a degree in it because, there must be a way to get a degree in it. There was an awful lot of crappy information out there. You can imagine there still is. But in the 80s, all we had was like Muscle and Fiction magazine and that kind of thing. And so we really, you didn't know who to believe or what was real. And there was no real personal trainer profession. So around the mid 80s or so, I really started getting into this stuff. And I decided I found out that you could get certified as a personal trainer. So I thought, I got to do that. And I did it. And I did it again. And I just couldn't get enough. I got 6 certifications as a personal trainer. And I ultimately took a non-music job as a floor trainer at the Equinox Fitness Clubs, which was just opening. It was like 1990, 91, New York City, Amsterdam Avenue, new gym, Equinox. And I literally walked in. I had never trained a client in my life. All I had done was work out and gotten 6 certifications. And I said, I'm a trainer. I can, and for whatever reason, I vibed with the Ericos, who was the family who began Equinox. And they hired me. And I was on the floor at Equinox for a couple of years. I ultimately rose to become the dean of the Equinox Fitness Training Institute, which is, I'm proud to say that we designed a module or a way of training trainers that is current in almost every gym in America today. And I was a low-fat, calorie-counting, dyed-in-the-wool believer in the conventional wisdom. And I was the guy, I'm telling you, 1990, 91, we'd order egg white omelets and they'd come with a little bit of the runny, the yolk in it, and I'd send it back because I knew that would give me a heart attack. This is how much of a true believer I was. And what happened at Equinox was that the Atkins diet became popular again. It was around 1992, the 3rd edition of his book, The New Diet Revolution, came out. And he was a pariah in the medical and nutrition community. There were no keto diets. That was craziness. and Atkins was known for telling people, eat the bacon, eat the pork rinds. And you can just imagine, in today's world, people who say that still get, some dirty looks, but not as much, because we now know about keto diets thanks to Atkins, and we now know more about hormones and all of that stuff, but we didn't then. And I believed, like every other trainer and everybody else I knew, that fat was the enemy, carbs were our friend. And if our clients, we did such a disservice to this day, we believed that if our clients weren't losing weight with the advice we were giving them, they had to be lying. And that's still a common feeling among the medical profession. If you're burning enough calories and you're spending enough time on if you're really not cheating on that diet, you're eating that low-fat diet, you got to be lying. And there's, by the way, not to go too far afield, but there's an amazing TED lecture by Peter Attia, one of the great doctors in this field, literally with tears in his eyes, apologizing to the diabetic patients he treated over the years when he still believed that crap. So I believed that crap. And what convinced me it might not be true was our clients. Because it's 1992, they're not losing weight. Now, I'm not saying nobody ever lost weight on a low-fat diet, but it was hard. And it certainly wasn't what we were told it was. And I'd have a client who'd come in and say, you know what? My neighbor lost all this weight on Atkins. I'm going to try that thing. And I would say, you cannot do that. You might lose a couple of pounds, just like the models who take cocaine every morning, they lose weight also, but you will die. You will have a heart attack. This is medical malpractice. This guy is a quack. You can't go on Atkins. And they didn't listen to us. So they come back, quite a lot of them, and their blood pressure numbers are lower. Belly fat has gone down. They look like they have more energy. Their eyes are clearer. Clearly it's working. And that made me think there's a term in psychology, you may have heard it, it's called cognitive dissonance. It means when there's two ideas that can't coexist. It can't be a square and a circle. You know, your neighbor might be the nicest guy in the world, but if you went up to the top of the book depository and shot up everybody, that's cognitive dissonance. This nice kid that, you know, mowed my lawn is now a serial killer. Those are cognitive. There are two ideas that can't exist together, so the mind has to find a way to make them compatible. So here I am thinking the Atkins diet kills you because of the fat and the cholesterol, and here are my patients, my clients, who are looking better and better, and it ain't killing them. Something's wrong. So I began to question some of this, and I decided it was time to learn a little more about nutrition, because the only thing trainers learned back then, and I'm sorry to say in many places it's still true, was what we learned from the American Dietetic Association, which, let me go on record as saying, was the most destructive organization that ever existed in America as far as giving crappy advice and then standing up there and being spokespeople on TVs and telling you all of this shit that has turned out to be boneheadedly wrong. So I was not a fan of the I'm not a fan of the American Dietetic Association. Yes, it changed its name because its reputation just got worse and worse. So it's now called the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. It's the same organization. Point is, that's all we knew. And their mantra was, you don't need supplements. You can get everything you need from food. Supplements are just an expensive urine. That was one of their talking points. Another was that high carb diets and low fat diets will keep you healthy and make you live longer and help you lose weight. Oh, they were filled with them. They were filled with them. And that's what we learned. And now I was questioning that. And now I was quite respected at this point as a personal trainer. I gave, now we're in the mid to late 90s. I was giving talks at training conventions and everybody loved me. Till I started questioning that conventional wisdom, till I started saying, wait a minute, guys, there's something that's not right here. You guys keep telling us how saturated fat and cholesterol, how they're so bad and what they do, and I'm not seeing it. And neither are my buddies. And the other men and women who are training people, we're not seeing it either. Something's kind of wrong here. And as soon as that happened, they all went, what does he know? He's only a trainer. He's not a doctor. He's not a nutritionist. And I did what a lot of people do when they're in that position. I went back to school, got the letters so that I could then say, okay, I got the letters now, got the certification. I'm board certified by the American College of Nutrition, and you guys are full of it. And that's kind of what happened. So I'm now in the mid 90s. I was always a writer. Second grade, I was in special writing classes. So I've written about, when I was a musician, I had columns about music. It was a relatively easy transition. As one of my training clients at Equinox was the editor-in-chief of Fitness Magazine. She brought me on as a contributing editor. I started writing. I became the iVillage weight loss coach. iVillage, nobody remembers that. It was in the late 90s, in the beginning of the internet, was when the internet was really taking off and AOL was a big thing. iVillage was the portal for women's health. It was ultimately sold to NBC, but it was terrific. And I became the weight loss coach. That led to a book deal, my first book, which nobody read because it came out the day after 9/11. And it was called Shape Up, the 8-week program to transform your body, your health, and your life. And from there, you know, it's 20 years later, I've written 15 books plus Metabolic Factor. I'm known as the nutrition mythbuster because I'm not a big believer in the conventional wisdom. I've found it to be wrong and lacking in so many ways and so many times. That's my crazy dog who feels it's his duty to let me know if any human being comes within a square mile of my house. That's his job, is to let the neighborhood know. But that's pretty much how my career evolved. It's kind of being a gadfly to the establishment. I started out writing books, like I said, Shape Up. Then I wrote Living Low Carb, which was kind of an analysis of all the low carb diets out there and what the research said about them, and busting the myths about low carb eating. That book's now in its 4th edition. I'm glad to say people are still reading it. I still get letters from doctors saying you changed my practice. I didn't know any of this. And, many books later, I was writing books like the 150 Healthiest Foods on Earth and the 150 Best Ways to Get Energy and all of this stuff. And my editors came to me and said, we have great idea for the next book in the series. How about the 150 best ways to lower your cholesterol? And I said, I don't think I'm the guy for that. Because I don't think that's the target. And I don't even want to be part of the zeitgeist telling people that that's what they should be looking at. I think it's the wrong target. They said, what are you talking about? Everybody knows cholesterol causes heart disease. And I said, well, it's not true. And we discussed this, and I told them the book I'd like to write, which was The Myth of Cholesterol. And they said, out of the question, they weren't going to publish some cockamamie nutritionist, ex-personal trainer, even if he had a PhD, you know, who had some cockamamie theory that went against the entire medical establishment. They did not know that I was not the only one saying this, by the way. They finally, because I sent them study after study after study, they said, we'll let you do it on one condition. You need to have an MD as a co-author, and it has to be a cardiologist. And not only a cardiologist, it has to be world famous cardiologist. It has to be like a nationally known cardiologist who's got to be on the cover with you. I said, no problem. I called up my friend Steve Sinatra, who was a board certified cardiologist and has written many, many books. I said, do you want to take on this cholesterol bullshit? And he said, I'm in. And we wrote The Great Cholesterol Myth in 2012. It got us on Dr. Oz. It got us on the doctors. And understand the reason I got on, how did a trainer get to talk about, the reason was that when you think about the objections to high-fat diets, what are they? They are always that fat will raise your cholesterol. And we don't want that because cholesterol causes heart disease. But what if that's not true? What if cholesterol is not, as it's being measured, is not the main risk factor for heart disease? And what happens to the guidelines? What happens to all the reasons you've been told, don't eat animal products, don't eat saturated fat, it'll raise your cholesterol? Well, if cholesterol is not the boogeyman, what happens to the dietary guidelines? I'll tell you what happens to them. They collapse like a house of cards because they're built on that one fear of what fat will do to your cholesterol. And that's the myths that we had to disassemble. And when we did it in 2012, Dr. Oz still got letters saying, how can you have these cracks on? I was in a documentary on the Australian Broadcasting Company about heart disease and about cholesterol myths. And they had not just me and Sinatra, they had John Abramson from Harvard, all these people who have been naysayers about the cholesterol mythology and the saturated fat mythology. And people wrote into the Australian Broadcasting Company. They had a committee of doctors write in and say 31,000, I don't know how they knew this, 31,000 people will die if they follow Bowden and Sinatra's advice and give up their statin drugs. I mean, it was quite a thing. And that was 2012. Now, we did the new edition of the book last year. And the reaction is very different because there's been 10 years of people like me saying the emperor's got no clothes, guys. The low-fat diet doesn't work. And high-fat diets don't kill you if they're done properly. And what you're teaching is wrong. And 10 years of that, it's still the mainstream point of view. But there's a lot of us saying this now. We are not alone. And it's a very important thing to me because it really does have a lot to do with COVID. And we can talk about that more. But that's how I got from being a drug addict in the 80s to being whatever you characterize me so generously as today.
Well, and now I'm not even sure which question that was submitted to ask next because there's so many places to go with this. I'm going to start with the easiest question we were submitted, which is also the hardest question, actually, which is, what do you think is the most nutritious diet for us to be eating?
I do not think there is a most nutritious diet for us to be eating. Let me be very clear. I have never, even when I was back in the 90s as a trainer, ever thought one diet fits everybody. I just absolutely don't believe that. I can give you case after case after case. High carb diets are bad for you. The Bantu in South Africa, 80% carbohydrates, they have no body fat and they're healthy as hell. High fat diets are bad for you. No, the Maasai eat blood and meat and nothing else. And they're also lean and healthy. The only thing that all these diets have in common, whether it's a good high carb diet, and don't confuse what I just mentioned that the Bantu eat with what we eat here as a high carb diet. You wouldn't recognize the carbs that they eat. They're fibrous, bitter, but they're roots and vegetables and all that stuff, and they are carbs. the point is that any healthy, successful diet that works for any group of people, the one thing they all have in common is they don't eat processed food. They eat real food. And I've done, I don't know, 8 gazillion interviews on TV and radio where they ask me at the end, what's the one piece of nutritional advice you can give that has the most impact, most bang for the buck? And I never vary it. Eat real food, like each word with a period after it, a capital with the next. And if you think about that, if you really think about that, it's the most important thing you can do. And you can do it as a vegan and you can do it as a carnivore. You can eat real grass-fed meat that you went out and caught, or you can be a vegan and not eat anything with meat. But that's not how it really usually works. But if you kept it to real food, and I'll define what I mean by real food in a minute, all the rest is details. Some people do much better with higher fat. Some people do, not many, but some people do better with higher carbs. Nobody does better with more sugar. Nobody does better with more vegetable oil. Nobody does better with more processed food. So that's the core thing. And beyond that, I think if I've learned one thing in 30 years of doing this, is that every individual is an individual. No formula works for everybody. You will find people who will take a couple of Valium and go out and party all night, and you'll take people who drink 2 espressos and go sleep like a baby. The range of human response to different foods and elements and people is enormous, and we need to respect that and stop looking for the perfect diet. What we need to look at is the perfect match. The perfect match between a philosophy and me, between an eating pattern and me. What fits me, what works for me, what's sustainable for me, and what gives me and how do you know it's working? What's your energy level like? It's the best single thermometer of how you're doing. How's your energy? You waking up tired? Are you falling asleep at 4 in the afternoon? Can you barely keep your eyes open at 6? Are you interested and enthusiastic about it? That's what you're monitoring. If you've got a diet that's doing that for you and it doesn't involve cocaine, I'm 100% behind you.
That's a great answer too, because one of the people sent me this. I was laughing this morning because I guess you'd shared, and I saw this too, your oatmeal on your Instagram, and I had a metabolic factor person send me this and go, "Did you see Dr. Jonny shared oatmeal?" Ask him why. And so actually that's a good segue, because you were talking about real food, but I was just laughing and I was like, well, I'll bring it up on the call.
A couple things about that. First, and this is such a cop-out disclaimer. I don't do my own social media. I have an assistant who does it, who looks through books, and I mean, it's all words I've said. It's all true, but she kind of manages what goes out there. And in the 150 healthiest foods on earth, I did write about oatmeal. Oatmeal is one of the better carbs. I am not, because of what I just told you, not believing in one size fits all with diets. I don't believe everybody should be on a keto diet, and I don't think it necessarily works for everybody at all times in their lives. So there are very many healthy diets that can incorporate some fibrous and fiber-laden carbohydrates. I eat them all the time. Now, 10, 15 years ago, I also believed breakfast was the most important meal of the day. This was conventional wisdom. We didn't talk about intermittent fasting then. We thought it was terrible if you missed breakfast. We didn't understand a lot of the benefits of time-limited eating and things like that. And so, I'm not apologizing for putting oatmeal up there. It's a damn good, not the instant kind, that's crap, but real oatmeal, steel cut oats, or real Quaker oats that you have to cook for a while, it's not a bad food, and you can make it great by adding protein powder and berries and all the other stuff and nuts. So that's why there's really no contradiction to me talking about oatmeal if you accept the fact that I am not a dyed in the wool, don't eat carbs kind of guy. Oatmeal is a great carb to use on the carbohydrate feast and metabolic factor. So are beans.
I was just going to say that. So yeah.
So.
And then this one is going to be a bigger question, but this one I had to, this was asked on Instagram, and it was sent to us when I posted a video. And this person asked, did you really have COVID? And
oh, yeah.
and to talk about what your thoughts were on COVID.
Oh,
I
yeah.
that all day, but I will bring that up because you're going to open a can of worms if I do that.
Oh, no, I absolutely did get it. Me and Michelle got it, and her kids. What would you like to know about it?
I guess I think they wanted to know if you really had it. And then I personally would love for you to talk a little bit about how you think COVID fits in with cholesterol and with insulin resistance.
And I didn't give you that question to ask me, did I?
So I don't think that's what the person was asking you, but I'm going to turn that question into that.
It's a great question. I love when people ask that because let me draw the connection before I tell you my personal experience with COVID. Is that okay? I'll tell you why I think what we talk about in the Great Cholesterol Myth, which everybody thinks is just a book about heart disease, which is partly true, but not completely, why that is relevant right now today to our situation. And it's this. We were given a diet collectively, and it wasn't just in America, it was all around the world, that basically demonized fat. That's fact number one. We adopted that diet, and even the people who weren't really thinking about diets adopted that diet because we are flooded with processed carbohydrates. So we eat what's called the standard American diet, largely based on the information from the 60s and 70s that fat and cholesterol cause heart disease. So we don't want that, so we eat all this crap, and now this is the situation. We have an obesity epidemic. We have a diabetes epidemic. We have a name we never had 10 years ago called diabesity because the origins of those two things are the same. In our book, The Great Cholesterol Myth, we talk about insulin resistance, which is not only at the heart of diabetes, not only at the heart of prediabetes, but also at the heart of heart disease. And shortly after our book came out, Jason Fung's book came out about cancer. And he said, you know what, guys? Insulin resistance, which I'll explain in a second, it's not just at the bottom of diabetes and obesity and heart disease. It's also a big factor in cancer. And then another book came out by this really smart guy named Thomas Brickman, who I never heard of, Dr. Brickman, it's called Why We Get Sick. And he makes the case from page one that insulin resistance is at the heart of every single major chronic disease. Well, insulin resistance is a dietary disease. It's a metabolic condition that affects 88% of Americans to some degree, and it's at the heart of every pre-existing COVID condition. Diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity, heart disease, Alzheimer's, name it, lung, kidney, liver disease, all linked to insulin resistance. Insulin resistance happens when you eat too many carbohydrates. We ate too many carbohydrates because we were told to avoid fat. So that dietary advice literally took us into an epidemic, 88% of America, of insulin resistance, which is the core of every pre-existing condition for COVID, every single one of them, except maybe schizophrenia, and there are some socioeconomic risk factors as well. But every medical condition you can think of has insulin resistance as a factor, in some cases as a huge factor. And insulin resistance is a disease of carbohydrate metabolism. So, and you can reverse, prevent, or correct insulin resistance in about 3 days with a high-fat diet. So the connection between these cockamamie dietary guidelines that we got and the metabolic condition that was produced in an awful lot of people who followed those guidelines, that has set us up for more deaths from COVID. And I can't prove this. This isn't scientific. We will know this in 10 years. But I believe that even though this is a nasty little disease and nobody wants to get it, I don't think we'd be dying at the rate that we are dying at if there wasn't a worldwide epidemic of metabolic derangement. And that is what insulin resistance is. It's an overload of crappy processed carbohydrates and vegetable oil that makes your body unable to deal with the sugar load. You get insulin resistance, and from there it can go in any direction you want. Diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's, which is now being called type 3 diabetes because of this connection. So that's the urgency, because if people would change their diet right now, we'd have less deaths from COVID next year.
And do you think that because of the way you eat, is you had a better COVID?
I was never afraid of COVID. At one point, my publicist was pitching an article because I'm 74 and I'm not afraid of COVID. It wasn't that, I guess, unusual. And it wasn't that I wanted to get it. In Metabolic Mastery, I guess most people know that if they're from there, that I do a monthly interview with experts. And I interviewed Daniel Amen, who I've interviewed a number of times. Wonderful psychiatrist, brilliant guy. And he's in my age group. And when I did the interview, it was, I think, March of last year. He'd just written a book on mental illness. And I was interviewing him for Metabolic Mastery on that. And I said, Daniel, it'd be crazy for us not to talk about COVID. This thing's exploding. How are you feeling about it? You and I are in the same age group. And he says, this is how he talks. He says, well, it's a nasty virus, and I certainly don't want to get it. But my vitamin D level is 73. I think I'll manage. And that's kind of how I felt. Now, I know that this virus takes awful turns and unsurprising turns. And it has devastated so many people. And this is not a blaming, but I also felt like, look, 98.5% of people recover from this or not, they don't die and they don't have severe reactions. I'm going to bet that I'm going to be in that 98.5%. Remember, I didn't start boosting my immune system yesterday. I started 30 years ago when I recovered from drugs. I take 52 supplements a day, and I eat very, very well. And I exercise just about every day, either walk the dog for half an hour or I play tennis for 2 hours. I wasn't afraid of it, not because I didn't want to get it, but because I thought I was as prepared as you could be to fight it off. And many people were, in fact, fighting it off successfully. That's why I wasn't afraid of it. My vitamin D levels are 66. So if that answers the question at all, I mean, it's sort of like, I believe my philosophy about the virus, about most of these things is, you have a house on the California coastline, or on the Florida coastline, and hurricanes come. And you can predict them a day or two before, whatever it is that they can do, but you can't do much about how tumultuous they are and how ferocious they are. They either are or they aren't. So what are you going to do if you have a house on the Gulf Coast? You're going to try to build the house as strong as you can. Some things are out of your control, right? I mean, the force of the hurricane, some weird tsunami that was unexpected, it may knock your house out. But what you can do is you can reinforce the concrete. You can reinforce the cement. You can reinforce the windows. You can build it with good materials from the beginning. And that's the best you can do. And that's how I felt. Daniel had done what I was hoping I had done, was I built the best house I can. And I'm going to, what else can I do? I didn't want out without a mask. I wasn't a COVID denier or anything like that. I just felt like I didn't want that level of stress in my life, which really makes you even more vulnerable to this stuff. And I was just going to be confident that I had done a good job with my building materials. And I felt like I'd be in a good position to be able to fight it off. And that is exactly what happened.
That is a perfect answer. I remember that interview very much. And for those of you who don't know what Metabolic Mastery Club is, you should know. But it is our membership program. It is 6 months of $77 a month. And then you have lifetime access, and it's a $1 trial. So if you are not a member and you're interested, you can just send us a message or leave a comment, and I'll make sure someone calls you and follows up with you, because we also have, besides those expert interviews, even next week, we're having a live meet and greet with Dr. Jonny and members of MMC on Zoom. It is going to be very fun. But I would actually really love for you, before we close out, to briefly just talk about the metabolic factor diet, because you did just talk about how important it is to be a fat burner and not a sugar burner. And maybe you could explain how that program in 22 days kind of helps with that. For those people who are new, since this is on our public channels, you might be like, well, he said this metabolic factor thing. What the heck is that?
Yeah. So I've been working with the publishers of Metabolic. They're the greatest group I've ever worked with for an extended period. It's just amazing. And this is my 4th program with them. But each of them has been an evolution of the one before. First one we did was Unleash Your Thin, wildly successful, thank God. We redid it, reformulated it, did some improvements, called it New You 22. It was still a 22-day program. And then the revised and updated with all the latest stuff that we've been able to figure out edition is the Metabolic Factor, which is also 22 days. And what we tried to do with this was combine a number of different elements that go into weight loss that people don't always talk about. Because one thing I can tell you, and maybe this is partly because I had a degree in psychology, but I don't think so, because my friend Jay Tita and so many others who didn't study psychology have come to the same conclusion, which is that weight loss ain't about calories. It's not about your food diary. It's about so many things that we don't address. The good ones do, but it takes years to realize that. It's about your relationships. It's about your stress levels, which can put on weight. It's about your sleep. Bad sleep can put on weight. It's about your confidence and your enthusiasm and your relationship with your community and your neighborhood. Those things are major factors in metabolic health. And I don't have time to give you the references, but I can give you references on every one of those things. They are factors in metabolic health, particularly stress and sleep and digestion, all of them. So what we did with metabolic factors, we incorporated all of those elements, those pathways. So yes, there's stuff to do with nutrition. And I'll get into that in a minute. And that's kind of the core that everybody talks about. But we also have things you need to do in those 3 weeks for your sleep to improve that. Things you need to do for detoxification to improve that. Things you need to do. And in each of these areas, there are actual assignments, and they're not hard, but they are holistic in the sense that the theory of the program is that everything matters. What you think about, look, there's an entire science called neuropsychoimmunology, which is basically how your thoughts influence your immune system. So all this stuff's related, and that's what we tried to do with Metabolic Factor. Now, to zero in on the nutrition part, it is primarily a keto-friendly diet for the first 10 days. Nobody's measuring ketones. Nobody's doing urine or breath or blood measurements on ketones, but it's very friendly, and many people do get into ketosis. Others don't. It doesn't matter. It's basically about keeping carbs very low for that first 10 days. And eating really good, healthy food with all the fat you want and with a moderate amount of protein, and carbs just aren't really primarily featured in that first group. And then 10 days at a strategic time, which for us was the 10th day, we have what we call a carb feast. And the theory behind the carb feast is what's called carb cycling. And you can look that up and find out. But what we found when we were researching Metabolic Factor is that, like every diet, but maybe even particularly so with keto, you reach plateaus, and they are maddening. And a lot of people don't stick it out to see the plateau change. Or what happens is your body kind of adapts to whatever you're giving it and gets more efficient at it, and the weight loss will stop, which isn't necessarily my main concern, because I want to get people healthy, and I think they can be healthy at a variety of body weights, but people get very discouraged when that happens. And we actually did, the research we did for this was not like going to PubMed and looking at the studies, because this is cutting edge stuff. This is what trainers and health professionals are doing in the field. So we went to them. We said, what do you guys do when weight loss stops on a keto diet? Or what are some of the things that's going on in the field? And we kept coming back to this carb cycling concept, which is allowing people to eat any kind of junk they wanted at very strategic times during the 3 weeks. And what that accomplished was a couple things. One is, if you know you're only a few days away from eating all the Doritos you want, you can stick with the diet. It's just much easier when you know that it's not forever, that there are breaks. The second thing, and so compliance is much higher. Second thing it does, by giving you that break, is people find out really quickly what those foods really do to them. For example, if I was a cigarette smoker, no big surprise, I did everything. A cigarette smoker stops realizing what the effect of cigarette smoke is on their lungs, because they adapt to it If any of you ever smoked, think about your first cigarette. You almost choked to death. That's what your lungs really want to do with cigarettes. But they get used to the irritation, they get used to the inflammation, and you don't notice it. But that is what your body is doing when you take hot nicotine and pour it into your lungs the first time. Your body goes, what is this? Well, these people had a rest from junk food. Then they get that meal. Hey, you can eat everything you want. And I can't tell you the number of people who wrote to us and go, oh, I feel so sick. Did I used to like this stuff? This is horrible. No, it didn't happen with everybody. A lot of people had the cheat meal and they enjoyed it and all of that. But what we noticed over time was that the cheat meals got better. So all of a sudden, people are eating sweet potatoes instead of Doritos for their carb feast. And but the carb feast seems to give you a kind of reset and allow the weight loss and the metabolic healing to continue. It's a controversial concept. And I will admit that I had some hesitation when I put it in. I was talking to these people who were having an amazing success with it. And I said, let's try this because otherwise we're just putting them on keto. Let's see if this is going to make a difference. And we were surprised by the success of it. I mean, we beta tested this. We had thousands of people do it and give us their feedback. And the Carb Feast intervals really made a difference. And so that's basically what Metabolic Factor is. We don't have an exercise component to it in the first 22 days. And the reason for that is very simple. We concentrate on what we call movement as opposed to exercise. Now, people don't always know the difference of those two things. But exercise is when you go to the gym and you do 30 minutes, or you go to the tennis court and you have an assignment, this is your exercise, but you actually burn totally more calories with your everyday movement, with running up the stairs, with walking to the water cooler, the stuff you do every day actually counts. There's even a technical name for it, NEAT. Non-exercise induced thermogenesis. These little movements matter. So what we do in the first 22 days, because we're making such a big adjustment to the diet and people are starting to pay attention to their sleep and their digestion, all the other stuff, we don't want you to take on exercise. A lot of people who start Metabolic Factor used to exercise and they're just getting back, or they don't exercise at all. They just want to lose weight. We don't want you to take on another thing. We set it up for success. So you do minimal stuff with just concentrating on movement. You can walk. That's great if you walk, but nothing really more strenuous. If people are already working out, their experience working out, we let them do it. You just pull it down a little bit and keep it going if it's really hard for you to stop. But for most people who are getting back into it or starting something for the first time, the way to set you up for success is to not overwhelm you with the things you need to, start doing. So that's why the exercise component is so unexpectedly maybe small. The good news is that if you do Metabolic Factor successfully, you are ready to move into my buddy Jade's incredible programs that he's put together as the exercise components that go with Metabolic Factor. So that I guess is the nutshell of what it is.
Oh, that was perfect. And I was actually going to ask you about the exercise component, because we get questions on that a lot in our pages and in our communities. And
Sure.
Also the Carb Feast, I will say, I cannot tell you the number of times in the past couple of weeks, even people have had their first Carb Feast and then said, oh my gosh, how did I find this appealing?
Yeah.
So I was laughing when you said
it's amazing, isn't it?
So I think this has been wonderful. I would again just mention that if you want more questions from Dr. Jonny answered, you can send them to us and we can arrange another one of these. Or again, you can join our Metabolic Mastery Club and you could join us next week if you can't wait until any longer. And of course, if there's a question that we didn't get to because we didn't see it coming in, I can't see all of my platforms at once. So like if you have been sending me something on Instagram right now, I apologize. But I can't be everywhere at once, but we'll get your question answered or get Dr. Jonny to do a future video on it. And just thank you for this. This was absolutely wonderful and fabulous and really fun.
I'm so glad. And let me just do a plug for Metabolic Mastery Club. Besides it being the best job I've ever had, and I've had some incredible jobs, it really is a community. I mean, I talk to Laura a couple times a month. what's the community asking? What are their most burning questions? And then I answer them in these on-the-go videos that I send 4 in a month, and they're just continual. I think Jade does the same thing, or sends videos in as well. But we are constantly like in touch with serving this community and wanting to know, you know, the concierge questions that you would ask if you had a nutritionist or if you had a trainer. And I love doing that. I love answering questions. I write a column for Clean Eating called Ask Dr. Jonny. So I mean, I'm a big believer in that. And when we get them directly from you, and there's actually like, here is Lisa, and she's in England, and this is her situation, and this is the food available, you know, and they tell us this, and it's just so wonderful to be able to talk directly to someone who has that problem and answer it for them. So consider joining it. It's really terrific. You get these great expert interviews that I do every month, and I do them with, oh my God, Laura can tell you it's a who's who. David Perlmutter, who wrote Grain Brain, and William Davis, who wrote Wheat Belly, and Daniel Amen, and just a lot of great people who really share their wisdom with us. And then those on-the-go videos, we do webinars every month. So there's a lot of interaction and a lot of chances to engage with us and for us to give you our best opinion. And my point on giving you the answers to things is I don't have the answer to everything. The one thing I do have is resources to get you the answer on everything, and the right answer, because I know who knows what they're talking about in each field. And if I don't know the answer, I do know how to get you a good one.
And he will get you the best possible answer. And one thing I'll also add on, we also have Bella, who develops our recipes for MMC. So it's really good, especially we get questions from people who have allergies and can't eat certain things. And if you tell her, I'm allergic to whatever, you know, nuts. So you want to find a keto bread that's nut free, she will get in the kitchen and she'll figure that out for you. So
or she'll make you one.
Well, she can bring it to my house, Dr. Jonny, right? I'm not allergic to nuts, but still, I would love her food delivered.
Absolutely.
This was just absolutely wonderful. So thank you all again. Submit our questions. If you'd like to join us with Metabolic Factor or Metabolic Mastery Club, you can just send us a little message or leave a comment, and we'll make sure someone calls or messages you to